Thank you all for coming here, given that we have the Talent Connect event also happening in Vegas. I'm going to keep this introduction very short. Tom's been here before. He is also a very public figure. One of the things that I was kind of entertained by when I was thinking about how to introduce him, you can go through the accolades. You can say, winner of the Pulitzer Prize 3 times, publisher of landmark books that changed the way that we think about the world. You can kind of go down this list, and this is part of the reason why we're very excited to have him here. But I have a personal reason that I'm particularly excited, because when people ask me what it is that I want to be when I grow up, my normal answer is public intellectual. It's the path that I kind of have been going down. And I've kind of learned in the last couple of years that maybe the best answer is, well, maybe I just don't want to grow up. But given that, I still actually think that one of the things that we most need is a robust discussion of who we are as individuals and as a society and where we should go. And it's one of the things that's most important to strengthen this public intellectual culture in the US. And it's actually part of what set me on the path of being a software entrepreneur. Well, in terms of public intellectuals that the US can hold its head high and say, well, we are working on this, I think Tom is in that very short list. And so, I'm considering, well, I guess I will embarrass Tom and say, maybe I want to be Tom when I grow up. And one of the other things that when I was reviewing his many accomplishments in his biography, I was reminded that we were both Marshall Scholars, actually, and maybe this is one of those curses that Marshall Scholars go and say, okay, I want to try to say things that are wise, that help us figure out where we should be going. And with that, I think I should hand over the mic.
Thank you, Reid. Great to be back here at LinkedIn. It was a couple years ago, I think I was here, wasn't it, Reid, for yes. Hot, Flat, and Crowded. And I'm here today to talk about our new books. I wrote this with a friend, Michael Mandelbaum, who teaches international relations at Johns Hopkins, called That Used to Be Us. And so what I thought I'd do is just talk for about 30 minutes, try to give you the overview of some of the key parts of the book, can't get into all of it, and then really look forward to having a discussion with you and both getting your feedback and I hope learning from you, which is really why I'm here. That used to be us. Whenever we tell people the title of the book, their first question is, but does it have a happy ending? And we tell everybody it does. It does. We just don't know whether it's fiction or nonfiction. That's really the challenge. That really depends on us. So you might ask, why did 2 foreign policy geeks, I write the foreign affairs column for the New York Times, Michael is a chaired professor of international relations at Johns Hopkins, end up writing a book about domestic American politics, which is what this is. And the answer, excuse me, is very simple. We are longtime friends. We talk almost every day about the world and about foreign policy. We were actually neighbors in Bethesda, Maryland. And we started noticing something over the last couple of years, that every conversation we'd have would start by talking about the world and end by talking about America. And we eventually concluded that something obvious was crying out to us, that America, its fate, future, vigor, and vitality, was really the biggest foreign policy issue in the world. And unless we really thought about that, where America was, where it needed to go, how it could or could not continue to project power into the world, we really couldn't write very effectively about foreign policy. And our view is very simple. America is, for better and for worse, and on more days we feel, and in more ways, for better, but hardly perfect, but for better and for worse, is the tentpole that holds up the global system. And if that tentpole buckles or frays, your kids won't just grow up in a different America. They will grow up in a different world. And therefore, something actually very big is at stake right now. Because what's in play is whether my generation, I'm a baby boomer, I'm 58, will be the first generation that does not pass on the American dream to the next generation. That really is in play now. And it was our deep and abiding concern that that could be the case that really prompted us to write this book and think about the challenges we face and how we rise to them. So Michael's a movie buff. I like movies too. So the book is built around a lot of movies, some of which I will share with you. And one scene in particular probably really zeroes in on kind of the anxiety that prompted this book. It's from the 1958 classic Touch of Evil, one of the great Orson Welles movies. It's a movie about murder, kidnapping, conspiracy, and corruption in a town on the Mexican-American border. Orson Welles plays a crooked cop who tries to frame his Mexican counterpart for a murder. At one point, Welles stumbles into a brothel and finds the proprietor, Marlene Dietrich, who is also a fortune teller, with cards spread out in front of her. "Read my future for me," Welles says. "You haven't got any," she replies. "Your future is all used up." It was really that fear about our country that animated this book. Now, we do not believe in any way that our future is all used up, but we need to get our act together and fast, because right now we are driving around the world without a bumper or a spare tire. And if we bump into something, it could have enormous implications. So just to shape our discussion this morning, I'm going to read for you just the first few paragraphs of the book, the opening chapter, which is called, "If You See Something, Say Something." This is a book about America that begins in China. In September 2010, I attended the World Economic Forum Summer Conference in Tianjin, China. 5 years earlier, getting to Tianjin from Beijing involved a 3.5-hour car ride to a polluted, crowded Chinese version of Detroit. But things had changed. Now to get to Tianjin, you head to the Beijing South Railway Station, an ultra-modern flying saucer of a building with glass walls and an oval roof covered with 3,246 solar panels. You buy a ticket from an electronic kiosk offering choices in Chinese and English, and you board a world-class high-speed train that goes right into another roomy modern train station in downtown Tianjin. Said to be the fastest train in the world when it began operating in 2008, the Chinese bullet train covers 72 miles in 29 minutes. The conference itself took place in the Tianjin Beijing Convention and Exhibition Center, a massive, beautifully appointed structure the like of which exists in few American cities. As if the convention center wasn't impressive enough, the conference's co-sponsors in Tianjin gave some helpful facts and figures on their website. They said the total floor area of the Beijing Convention Center was 2.5 million square feet, and that construction started on September 15th, 2009, and was completed in May 2010. Reading those lines, I walked around my room saying September, October, November, December. That's 8.5 months. Returning home to Maryland from that trip, I was describing the Tianjin complex and how quickly it was built to Michael, my co-author, and his wife, Ann. At one point, Ann interrupted, "Excuse me, Tom, have you been to our subway stop lately?" We all live in Bethesda, Maryland, and often use the Washington Metro Rail subway to get to work in downtown Washington. I had been at the Bethesda station and knew exactly what Ann was talking about. The 2 escalators there had been under repair for nearly 6 months. While one was being fixed, the other was closed and converted into a 2-way staircase. At rush hour, this was creating a god-awful mess. It sometimes took 10 minutes just to get out of the station. A sign on the closed escalator said that its repairs were part of a massive escalator modernization project. What was taking the modernization so long? We investigated. Kathy Asato, spokeswoman for Washington Metro, said that the repairs were scheduled to take about 6 months and are on schedule. Mechanics need 10 to 12 weeks, she said, to fix each escalator. A simple comparison made a startling point. It took China's Teta Construction Group 32 weeks to build a world-class convention center from the ground up, including giant escalators in every corner. And it was taking Washington Metro 24 weeks to repair 2 tiny escalators with 21 stairs each. We searched a little further. We found that on November 14th, the Washington Post ran a letter to the editor from Mark Thompson of Kensington, Maryland, who wrote, "As someone who has ridden Metro for more than 30 years, I can think of an easier way to assess the health of the escalators. For decades, they ran silently and efficiently. But over the past several years, when the escalators are running, aging or ill-fitting parts have generated horrific noises that sound to me like a Tyrannosaurus Rex trapped in a tar pit, screeching its dying screams. But the quote we found most disturbing came from Maryland Community News. It was a story about the long lines at rush hour caused by the endless metro repairs. The quote was from Benjamin Ross of Bethesda, a frequent metro rider, who said, "My impression standing on line there is that people have sort of gotten used to it." People have sort of gotten used to it. Indeed, that sense of resignation, that sense that, well, this is just how things are in America today, that the sense that America's best days are behind it and China's best days are ahead of it have become the subject of water cooler, dinner party, grocery line, and classroom conversations all across America today. So do we buy the idea, increasingly popular in some circles, that Britain owned the 19th century, America dominated the 20th century, and China will inevitably reign supreme in the 21st century? No, we do not. And we've written this book to explain why no American, young or old, should resign himself or herself to that view either. The two of us are not pessimists. We are optimists, but we are frustrated. We are two frustrated optimists. The title of this opening chapter is, "If You See Something, Say Something." If that sounds familiar, it is. It is the mantra of the Department of Homeland Security. It plays over and over on loudspeakers in airports and railroad stations around the country. Well, we've seen and heard something, and millions of Americans have too. What we've seen is not a suspicious package left under a stairwell. What we've seen is hiding in plain sight. We've seen something that poses a greater threat to our national security and well-being than anything Al-Qaeda does. We've seen a country with enormous potential falling into the worst sort of decline, a slow decline, just slow enough for us not to drop everything and pull together to fix what needs fixing. This book is our way of saying something about what is wrong, why things have gone wrong, and what we can and must do to make them right. So that's really what the book is about, and that is really the essential frame. Now, we basically argue that America today faces three great challenges, one of which you're right in the middle of, and it's the one I'm going to focus on, and the other two you'll be quite familiar with. The first challenge we believe that the country faces is the merger of globalization and the IT revolution, which has, in the last decade, really gone into steroids mode. And it's fundamentally changing the workplace and fundamentally requiring radical changes in education. We're going to talk about that in detail. The other two great challenges we face are obviously debt deficit, the whole entitlements issue, and lastly, energy and climate, how we power the future of growing middle classes around the world and don't tip the planet into disruptive climate change. So we think those are the three great challenges the country faces. I'm going to talk about the merger of IT and globalization in a second. Before I do, let me just start by saying what is so striking today is the contrast between how we start our day here in this country and how other countries like China or Singapore start their day. We are not starting our day in this country at sort of national political level by going through the exercise, what world are we living in? Okay, we're living in that world. What do we need to do to thrive in that world? We need to do those things. How do we implement those policies? How do we then fix and reform them as we implement them? That's not how we start our day in this country at the national political level. We start our day by one party saying to itself, how do I take this crowbar and stick it in the wheel of the other party so I can win this news cycle? That's basically how we start our day. There's a concept in the Air Force at the Top Gun School for Fighter Pilots that's called the OODA loop, O-O-D-A. It stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. And what they teach fighter pilots is that if your OODA loop is faster than the other pilot's OODA loop, you will shoot them out of the sky. Your ability to observe, orient, decide, and act. If, by contrast, their OODA loop is faster than your OODA loop, you are a dead person. Right now, our OODA loop as a country is completely discombobulated. If you watched the Republican debate the other night, it was a freak show, okay, in terms of observing, orienting, deciding, and acting on what is going on in the world today. One of my favorite quotes in this book is from a Singaporean economist who said to me, you know, Mr. Friedman, we in Singapore, we live in a thatched hut with no doors and no windows. We feel every change of temperature. We feel every change in wind direction, and we react. It's like you Americans still think you're living in a brick house with central heating. You seem to react to nothing. And that is a real problem we have right now. Our OODA loop is completely discombobulated. Well, if we were paying attention, what would we be most looking at right now? Well, I believe one of the three great things we've been looking at is this merger between globalization and the IT revolution. And what would we see? Well, when I sat down to work on this book, what I was sort of intuitively aware of was that something really big had happened in the merger of globalization and IT over the last 7-8 years. But it's been completely masked by the Great Recession and by 9/11. And what's happened, as the person who wrote The World is Flat, is that we've gone from Flat World 1.0 to 2.0. We've actually gone from a connected world to a hyper-connected world. And when it really hit me was when I started this book, I went and I took down the first edition of The World is Flat, which I started to work on in 2004. Opened up the index, look under FFFFA. Facebook wasn't in it. So when I was out declaring the world is flat, Facebook basically didn't exist, okay? Twitter was still a sound. The cloud was in the sky. 4G was a parking place out there. LinkedIn was a prison. Applications were what you sent to college. And for most people, Skype was a typo. All of that happened after I said the world was flat. All of that just happened in the last 6 years. And it's taken us from connected to hyper-connected. And I see signs of this everywhere. When I travel abroad, I like to I love to read all the newspapers because you find like little stories in the newspapers that really tell you a lot. I was in India in October 2010, and the Hindustan Times ran a small news item that really caught my eye. It said that a Nepali telecommunications firm had just started providing 3G mobile network service at the summit of Mount Everest, the world's tallest mountain. The story noted that this would allow thousands of climbers and trekkers who throng the region every year access to high-speed internet and video calls using their mobile phones from the top of Mount Everest. Can you imagine the number of calls being made every day from the top of Mount Everest now starting, "Mom, you will never guess where I'm calling you from." That's going from connected to hyper-connected. Another sign of it, you see it in the academic world. Another small item in the New York Times last year was about Grinnell College. Small, wonderful liberal arts college in the middle of Iowa. My mother-in-law went there. She was later chairman of the board. Great college, 1,600 students. Last year, almost 10% of all applications to Grinnell College came from China. Of those 10%, 43% had perfect 800s on their math SATs. So that's not like now we got our cute little, exchange student from Beijing. Okay, that's like connected to hyper-connected. That's Grinnell College we're talking about too. We're not talking about, University of the Pacific out here in central Iowa. Now, one other example of connected to hyper-connected I really see is in the news universe. So when I wrote The World is Flat, I said we'd connected Boston and Bangalore. Well, we've actually now gone from connecting Boston and Bangalore to connecting Boston, Bangalore, and Surrey. You say, where's Surrey? That's a town 90 miles to the interior with 90,000 people, which, thanks to smartphones now, is completely integrated onto the grid with your kids and mine. Or to put it in Middle East terms, when I wrote The World is Flat, we'd connected Detroit and Damascus. We've now connected Detroit, Damascus, and Dara. You say, where's Dara? Dara is the dusty Syrian border town on the Syrian-Jordanian border where the Syrian revolution began, where thanks to flip cam video, cell phone texting, and cell phone pictures have been pumping out video, streaming and text to the world of the Syrian rebellion from Daraa. In fact, if you go to YouTube and look at footage from Syria, notice at the bottom of the screen, right-hand corner, where it would normally say ITN or BBC, you know what it says? It says SNN. SNN stands for Sham News Network. Sham is Arabic for Syria. Sham News Network is a completely fly-by-night website that Syrian dissidents created that everyone in Syria now dumps their video, pictures, links into. And my daughter, who works for the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, they now go to Sham News Network to get their feed for the evening about the uprising in Syria. No one knows who Sham News Network is. No one knows who created it. All I know is the 10 people here in the front row have enough money in their wallets to have started it right now. So that's going from connected to hyper-connected. So what does all this mean for the labor market? And then what does it mean for education? So traditionally, the labor market's been basically divided into 3 tiers. What we call first non-routine work. That's what all of you do. Engineers, technologists, scientists, writers, artists, hopefully journalists, people who have skills that cannot be described by an algorithm and require critical problem solving and reasoning. Non-routine work. We all want to be in non-routine work. Second is routine work, which in the hyper-connected world has been completely crushed, basically. Anything that could be described by an algorithm, outsourced, automated, or digitized, has been crushed. And that's crushed a lot of people who are doing routine work. And then there's non-routine local work. That's the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, the nurse, work that has to be done face-to-face. It cannot be described by an algorithm. Has to be done face-to-face, but that work will depend in terms of pay on the strength of your local economy and the supply and demand there. So basically, what's happened are 2 very important things as we went from connected to hyper-connected. First, non-routine work has gotten crushed, and what that means is if you do not have a high school degree, which 50% of the young people in our most disadvantaged neighborhoods today are dropping out of high school before a degree. If you do not have a high school degree now, there is nothing for you. I live in Bethesda, Maryland, next to Baltimore. 50 years ago, the biggest employer in Baltimore was Bethlehem Steel. Today, the biggest employer in Baltimore is Johns Hopkins University Medical Center. They do not, when the days of Bethlehem Steel, you could drop out of high school, join the union, get a job at the steel mill, get a mortgage, have a house, a yard, a dog, 2 kids, retire, live a nice middle-class American dream. At Johns Hopkins University Medical Center, they do not let you cut the grass without a BA. Okay? So that's basically what's happened. But something else has happened. Not only has non-routine work been crushed, not only has routine work been crushed, but non-routine work, the game has risen. And again, as I said, we build the book around movies. So we have 4 chapters on this whole question of work in the marketplace. The first one is called Up in the Air, which describes going from connected to hyper-connected. It is the movie of our time. George Clooney, as you recall, plays a man whose job is to go around the world firing people face-to-face on behalf of multinationals. He loses his job when his new subordinate invents a cheaper way to do it over the internet. That it's a brilliant, even unconscious expression of what is basically going on right now. So that's connected to hyper-connected. But the next chapter is called Help Wanted. And Help Wanted explains, as I said, not only is routine work being crushed, but now the demand for non-routine work has gone up. And it's quite interesting. The way we got to this was by going around and interviewing 4 generic employers. One high-end white-collar, the head of the Washington office of a national law firm. One low-end white-collar, the head of an outsourcing firm in India. One blue-collar firm, DuPont. And one green-collar firm, in fact, the biggest green-collar firm in the world, the US Army. And here's what's really interesting when you talk to these 4 generic employers. What they all tell you is they're all looking for the same employee. What are they looking for? They're looking for employees who can do critical reasoning and problem solving, ... in order to get an interview. Critical reasoning and problem solving, non-routine skills, are now considered table stakes. What they're really looking for, I'll be interested if you find this in your own work, is they're looking for people who can invent, reinvent, and re-engineer their job while they're doing it. Because when you go from connected to hyper-connected, and product cycles and service cycles start to turn over so much quicker, the big boss up here has no clue what's going on. I mean, Reid's good, but he has no clue what's going on down here, okay? And if he doesn't have people on the line touching the product, the customers, and the services, who can not just do their job, but actually invent, reinvent, and re-engineer their job while they're doing it, then your company is going to be toast. And people intuitively understand this, even if they haven't articulated it. So I first got to this by talking to this Washington lawyer, happened to be a family friend, and we were talking in 2008. Lehman Brothers had just melted down, middle of the subprime crisis. His name is Jeff Lesk. I said, Jeff, what's happened to your law firm in the middle of all this? He said, oh, Tom, this is way off. I said, what are you doing? He said, we're laying off lawyers. I said, that's interesting. Who gets laid off first in a law firm? Is it last in, first out? Not anymore, he said. The people who are getting laid off are the ones who, when in the credit bubble, we had all this mountain of work. We gave them all that work. They did it, and they handed it back to us, and they did that work in a routine, non-routine way. Those people are gone. The people who are staying are those who came to us and said, Jeff, we could do this old work in a new way, or we could do new work in a new way. In other words, they were creative, non-routine workers. It's not enough to just say, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm an engineer. You've got to be a creative lawyer now. You've got to be a creative doctor. You've got to be a creative, well, not a creative accountant, but you know what I mean. Okay, we have enough of those. You have got to bring something extra that identifies your unique value creation. Because Reid is not going to be able to hire you or keep you unless there is a unique value creation proposition that you as an individual are offering. We call that in the book your extra. Because in this hyper-connected world, and this is the last chapter of this section, average is officially over. Average is over. Because when the world gets this hyper-connected, every boss now has access to more cheap software, cheap automation, cheap robots, cheap labor, and cheap genius. And therefore, if the world were graded on a curve, the whole curve has risen. So average is over. Everyone's got to bring their extra. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, very easy for you to say, Mr. New York Times columnist. Let me tell you about my life. I actually inherited James Reston's office in the Washington Bureau of the New York Times. James Reston was a great columnist and editor of the New York Times in the 60s and 70s. What an honor to inherit his office. I suspect when Mr. Reston used to come to the office in the 60s and 70s, he used to ask himself, I wonder what my 7 competitors are going to write today. And by the way, he knew all 7. Walter Lippmann, Mary McGrory, Stuart Alsop, Tony Lewis. I do the same thing. I come to the office every day now and I say, I wonder what my 70 million competitors are going to write today. I do the same thing. Only I have 70 million competitors. I just was in Hong Kong a few days ago. My column yesterday is from Hong Kong. If you go to the comments page, if you call the column up online, I really noticed this yesterday, some stuff you can't make up. The first comment begins, I live in China, and I have this to say about Mr. Friedman's column. Yeah, I'm keenly aware, my column, if I write about China, it's going to be held up in Hong Kong against the best Hong Kong columnists, against the best Hong Kong bloggers. And I can't just sort of write it and throw it over the wall and say, well, no one's going to see it there. So my sense of who I'm competing with now has just really exploded. The green-collar firm, this was really interesting. So the green-collar firm, the U.S. Army, that interview was with a man named General Martin Dempsey. Now, it's a name, if you follow the news, you heard about recently because he just became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, our top military commander. And we interviewed him, though, because before he got that job, he was head of the U.S. Army Education Corps. That's why we came to see him. He was in charge of the whole U.S. Army's education department, the biggest education department in America. But he actually got that job because he had an even more interesting career. General Martin Dempsey, in 2003, commanded the 1st Armored Division in Iraq. He was the guy who took Baghdad from Saddam Hussein. He is the general who took Baghdad from Saddam Hussein. In 2008, 5 years later, he became commander of CENTCOM, our overall military command in the Middle East. And in that job, he tells us in the book, he went to visit a far-flung base in Afghanistan, near the Hindu Kush, commanded by a U.S. Army captain. And he sat down with that captain for 2 hours, interviewed him, and as he tells us in the book, came back and had a huge epiphany. He realized that that captain, in 2008, in that far-flung base in Afghanistan, had access to more intelligence, U.S. intelligence, both tactical and at the national level, and could order up more firepower, more destruction, than he, General Martin Dempsey, could when he commanded the 1st Armored Division that took Baghdad from Saddam Hussein in 2005. That's how much things had changed in 5 years. And therefore, he realized how we train that captain, how we choose that captain, becomes fundamentally different. So he came back and completely revamped the U.S. Army education system. And one of the things he instituted was new recruits are now given iPhones when they show up at boot camp. And by week 3, they may be told by their drill sergeant, you download the app, you teach the course tomorrow, I'll sit in the first row. So the Army is completely revolutionizing its education system for a hyper-connected world, a world where average is officially over. So how do you approach this world? And a lot of parents ask us that. How do you lean into this world? And this may be of value to LinkedIn and its clients. There are 3 sort of attitudes that we would recommend. One is think like a new immigrant. 2 is think like an artisan. And 3 is think like a waitress at Perkins Pancake House on Highway 100 in Minneapolis. Let me explain all 3. First of all, think like an immigrant. How does a new immigrant think? New immigrant thinks, I'm here in Silicon Valley. There's no legacy place waiting for me at Stanford University or Santa Clara. I better figure out what world I'm in. My OODA loop better be really working. I better figure out where the opportunities are, and I better go after them harder, longer, and more vigorously than anybody else. That's how a new immigrant thinks. We are all new immigrants in the hyper-connected world. And the best way to lean into this world is think like a new immigrant. Nothing is owed you in this world. You really have got to identify the opportunities and go after them with more energy and sustainability than anybody else. Second, think like an artisan. This is an idea from Lawrence Katz at Harvard. Who is the artisan? Artisans were those people in the Middle Ages before mass manufacturing, before the Industrial Revolution, who made every item one-off. They made every saddle, individually. They made every purse, every set of tools, every utensil, every piece of furniture individually. And the best artisans were so proud of what they did, they carved their initials into their work. Do your job every day with that extra that would make you want to carve your initials into it at the end of the day. Lastly, think like a waitress at Perkins Pancake House, because everybody's got to find their extra. So when I was writing this book, I'm from Minneapolis, I was home having breakfast with my best friend Ken Greer at Perkins Pancake House on Highway 100, my favorite restaurant in Minneapolis. 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning, I ordered 3 buttermilk pancakes and scrambled eggs. Ken ordered 3 buttermilk pancakes and fruit. And after 15 minutes, the waitress returned with our plates. She put them down at the table, and she simply said to Ken, I gave you extra fruit. That's all she said. She got a 50% tip. Because that waitress, God bless her, she didn't control much, but she controlled the fruit ladle, and that was her extra. Everybody has got to find their extra, because average is officially over. We all now live in Garrison Keillor's Lake Wobegon, where all the men are strong, all the women are beautiful, and all the children are above average. So that's basically the first part of the book. That's the education, globalization, IT part. Then we do debt and climate. That debt chapter is called The War on Math, because we've been at war on math for the last 20 years. And the next chapter is called The War on Physics, because we've also been at war on physics. We said deficits don't matter, or Dick Cheney did, and we behaved like he was right. And then we said climate change is a hoax. Of course, we didn't believe that, but we behaved as if that was right. So as a country, we've been at war with math and physics for the last 20 years. Second half of the book, basically, is all about how we get out of this. But I think I'm going to stop here. I want to save plenty of time for questions, and we can explore any of these themes or any of the solution themes afterwards. So the floor is open. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I guess we got a microphone there, and so please hop up and fire away.
Hi,
Can you tell me what you do here and so what your name is?
Yeah, hi, my name is Anand Prakash. I work in the mobile team here, and I moved from India around 7 months back.
Uh-huh. So you just moved here?
Yeah, I just moved here. So I used to work there, and then I joined LinkedIn.
Did you work there for LinkedIn or for somebody else?
For somebody else.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I was very interested by your comment about, like, in China, things got done so fast, like the convention center, while it takes a lot of time in US. So, like, I can see a big contrast about how because I just moved here, about how things are in India versus here. So, interestingly, like, in China, they could have employed a very big labor force, maybe paying them $100 a month. Mm-hmm. While in US, in $100, you can probably get a skilled labor for like an hour. Maybe you'd be lucky if you can do that. So
yes.
How do we, so that's one part about the labor being
How do we deal
costly.
with that differential?
Yeah, so that's one thing, and it's kind of a vicious circle that I feel across everything. So, for example, like the insurance, lawyer, and medical, these three seem to be like a very big issue, at least how I see compared to there. Like in India, I never had insurance for medical. I could go and see the top doctors, and like a major heart procedure cost something like $7,000 to $8,000 in one of the best hospitals for my father-in-law. That's one part. Second part is like the insurance costs are not very high, the labor costs are not very high. I had a cook who cooked 3 times a day for $50 a month. And that guy worked from morning 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the night. The doctor that I saw, they used to work from morning 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the night. So the number of hours they worked were very higher, and it kind of worked out everyone. Doctor, because the labor cost was very low, the doctor did not need to worry about going and cooking at the house or keeping the house clean. So
I got it. That's a very important question. And I think there's 2 answers, and we really deal with them in the book. Let's first of all look at the labor arbitrage question. You know, there's only really one answer to that question, and that is that if a Chinese labor makes $100 a month, then a U.S. worker to compete with them has to be as productive by leveraging technology and the hyper-connected world as that labor making $100 a month. And so that's the only way. And we actually have a profile in the book of the oldest manufacturing company in Buffalo, Buffalo, New York. The real Rust Belt part of the country has been decimated from manufacturing. And what you see in this story, the company's called Eastman. They make cutting tools. Started out making cutting tools for the textile industry. Now they cut airplane wings and turbines, you know, for wind farms. And what you see in this company, which is got unionized employees, still in business. China completely ripped off their product. They call it Westman. This company's called Eastman, you know. But what you see is someone who's really nimble. So instead of one employee now, one unionized employee, you know, in the old days the union said, I bring the spoon, he brings the knife, and she brings the fork. Okay, that's gone. So one employee now runs 4 machines. So by that one employee running 4 machines, they become productive enough that they can actually compensate for 4 foreign workers, whether in Mexico or China or Vietnam, who are making far less, okay, when you add everything up. So, but what you also have to do is you got to totally leverage the hyper-connected world. So he's He's on the board of his local university and he uses them for research. They actually opened a little facility in China as a defensive move against their Chinese and to make some of their low-end input products. He's OODA loop. He's observing, orienting, deciding, and acting in a really, really focused way. And that's the way you can survive. That's the way you survive. And that's the only way you can survive. And the second half of your question was on, it was more about some of the social things like healthcare and whatnot, or?
Yeah, the healthcare and the law system here, like it's so suing friendly that kind of increases the cost for the medical because they
Sure.
need to pay for that.
Yeah.
So it's a vicious circle in a bad way.
Well, I mean, all I can say about that, and I have nothing really original to say about it, is that we can't afford some of this anymore. Yeah. And we need to sit back and basically, again, start with that question, what world are we in? And how do we need to adapt and streamline ourselves for that world? And that's precisely the conversation we're not having right now. And that's what the book is meant to catalyze. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I have just one small point.
I did the whole line of back. I better let, thanks. Just, thank you.
Hi, my name is Vicente. I'm responsible for information security here in LinkedIn. I moved from Brazil 10 years ago. And over the last 2 years, I noticed an interesting trend. And I noticed that in a couple ways. This year, I went to the consulate here in San Francisco to go ask for a visa for my family. Not visa, but a
The
passports.
Brazilian consulate?
Brazilian consulate, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
passports. And the officer at the consulate was saying, well, one of the things we're noticing is that there's a huge move of Brazilians going back to Brazil, right? And that they never seen before. It was actually always the other way around.
Interesting.
So I noticed that there, but and also recently I've been approached on LinkedIn by a couple of Wharton MBAs, Americans, and they were saying, hey, we're opening up this company in Brazil. We got top VC fund from Ron Conway, and this is a great opportunity. Would it be interested in all of that?
Yes.
So how are you seeing this kind of reverse migration
Right.
from some of the best minds, American or expat, to these kind of high growth countries?
Well, we actually in the book profile two companies, because all of this is enabled by the hyper-connected world. One is a company called Endostim. It makes a kind of heart monitor. It's actually not a heart monitor, it's actually for acid reflux. Startup in St. Louis. And their CEO's office is an iPad, basically. They do their innovation all over the world. They have testing in India, Israel, whatnot. And you really see what these virtual companies are starting to look like. And so your story is only partly, from an exclusively American point of view, sad to me. Part of it is inevitable, okay? That as, this is about what Fareed Zakaria called the rise of the rest. That's a really great thing. I mean, because if Brazil does, economics is not war. Brazil can do well and we can do well. In fact, if we both do well, we'll both really do well. So part of it is the rise of the rest. That's called relative decline. I mean, that just means other people, we've stayed here and they've come here. What we have to worry about is absolute decline.
Right.
Okay. Where in 5 years, Americans will be signing up at the Brazilian embassy for a visa because this will be some kind of wasteland, and they will be going down there. So the companies of the future, and I just stand back and say that. So I'm writing my column for Sunday about this. Because I'm reading the paper yesterday, and front page stories that Goldman Sachs reported a huge loss. And I thought, so there is some good news in the world, okay? And it's because, but the point being that I don't want Goldman Sachs, I don't want anyone to lose money or lose their job. But if Wall Street stops becoming a magnet for talent like yourself, and people go from making money from money back to making money from stuff, that's a really great thing. Because basically the shift the country went to, what Wall Street went through, was that it was designed to finance, Jagdish Bhagwati makes this point, Wall Street was designed to finance creative destruction, to come out here and fund the IPOs of the LinkedIns and others. But in the last 10 years, it morphed into destructive creation. Okay, it morphed into basically financing whether Lindy's sold more cheesecake than strudel. And so, and when that blew up, they almost blew us all up, So there's actually a shift back here. But I make that point saying this is the theme of my column, and it's the implied theme of the book. We're actually in the middle of another really big IT revolution. The combination of social, mobile, and cloud is as big a leap, as any of the earlier leaps we've gone through, okay? We're actually in the middle of a huge transformation from Flat world 1.0, 2.0, connected, hyper. Because globalization and the IT revolution are merging now in a way, and each reinforcing the other in a phenomenal way. You know it, you're in the middle of it. You would never know it anywhere than here, in like this, this like little neighborhood. We're in the middle of a revolution, and we're talking about 999, or we're talking about, you know, whether Romney actually knew the people mowing his lawn didn't have visas. I mean, these are, don't tell anyone, we don't want it around. These are signs of the apocalypse. Like, these are signs like when future archaeologists dig through, you know, and they kind of hit what was going on at LinkedIn with what was going on in Romney's lawn crew, you know, and the debate. They're going to say, like, wow, now we know why these people just imploded, you know. Because like they were in the middle of a revolution. So I say to people, we're having an economic crisis right now, and our politicians are having an election. And it's like they're two circles that just barely overlap, you know? So what you're talking about and what you're in the middle of, again, I think it's a really healthy, it's a healthy and inevitable thing. And all I want to make sure is that, and this is what we've got to think about, it goes a little back to the previous question. Everything now, because of the merger of IT and globalization, is going to be made in global supply chains. Whether it's your iPod or the innovation of the company that wants you, you will be part of a global supply chain of knowledge or of workers. We cannot optimize every slice of that supply chain. That is, we can do the ideation, we can do the orchestration really well, but we're never going to get the assembly, you know, part of it. I just want to make sure whatever supply chain you are part of, whether it's from here or Brazil, that we are part of it. If that happens, things are going to be okay. It'll be good for you and good for Brazil. What's scary is if all this stuff starts happening without us, because our OODA loop is so discombobulated, we're not even thinking about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, how you doing? My name
Great.
is Anadine Josephson, and I was brought in to do structure, policy, guidelines while we're scaling. So a lot of the OODA loop makes a lot of sense.
Interesting.
To me. Product of Jesuit education, Fordham, worked at the New York Times. Curious to hear what you have to say about what's going on right now with all the movements in Wall Street, San Francisco.
Yeah.
And secondly, I'm kind of noticing some messages that are coming through there with what would Ayn Rand say right now.
What would Ayn Rand say right now? Interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting thing. So I look at Wall Street, I look at all these as a continuum, because I actually was in Tahrir Square when the Egyptian Revolution happened. And that was like really cool. In fact, that was actually the most exciting story I've ever covered. And what was interesting, because it was so interesting, and what was interesting about it, my biggest impression from being in Tahrir Square, what was so interesting, is that it was totally apolitical. It actually was the biggest non-political political event. Because what it was actually about three things, Tahrir Square. First and foremost, it was about justice. It was about people feeling they lived in a deeply unjust system. What was the first thing they did? They burned down the police station, and they burned down the National Party headquarters. And it was a deep call for justice. Second, it was about dignity, very personal. I live in a hyper-connected world. The world is so flat that I can see how people in India and China are living. And why is it my Indian maid's kid just got into Harvard and my kid's struggling to get into Alexandria Polytechnic? They understood how far behind they were. The number of Egyptians who said to me, I was ashamed to show my passport. Can you imagine that? I always look for little telltale signs. So I was in the airport. I went back there. It must have been the second trip back. And I was in the newspaper shop, whatever. They're selling Tutankhamun ashtrays and whatnot, all these things, knickknacks. They had a camel there, stuffed camel, where if you squeezed its hump, it honked. And I took it and I turned it over and it said, "Made in China." Now, when you are one of the lowest wage countries in the world, okay, and your honking humped camel has to be imported from China, okay, that is such a source of embarrassment and humiliation. And lastly, it was about democracy, but again, in the dignity sense. I want to run my own life. I don't want Hosni Mubarak's son telling me what I can do. I'm not like a flock of chickens that is passed on from one generation to the next. And here I think President Obama's speech in Cairo had some subtle role. Because think about Obama in Cairo 2 years earlier. Oh, there was some Egyptian 18-year-old in that audience saying to himself, let's see, he's black-skinned, I'm black-skinned. His name's Barack, my name's Barack. His grandfather's a Muslim, my grandfather's a Muslim. He's president of the United States, and I can't even vote. The subtle impact of that, it was like a fuse, I'm telling you, was also very much down there, But, so taking to Wall Street, I think what Wall Street is about, first and foremost, is an inchoate. If it's about a sense of injustice, that people were doing really bad things. They were taking your money and mine and basically turning it into a gambling casino and betting on whether Lindy's sold more cheesecake than strudel. And the people who did some of the worst things completely got away with it. And so I think there's just a real, what it is beyond that, where it'll go beyond that, I don't know. And that's one of the questions I want to pose here. Because here's what really interests me, and I don't think we've fully gotten to this. I'd be curious if this is true in your company or if you see outside. One of the really obvious things about all these social movements, Tunis, Tel Aviv, Delhi, Wall Street, London, they have no leaders. And so one of the things I'm asking myself is there something about social networking, the culture of the social networking world, this horizontal world, that actually works against the emergence of leaders? Because we all know from our history, for a social movement to succeed, it needs mass, really large numbers, women's rights, civil rights. It needs identifiable leaders and a very clear, simple agenda. And you don't have that there, but not just there. Yeah, I mean, Cairo now, it's almost, it's going to be well on near a year. They still don't have, we all thought Weil, who named the Google guy, remember him? He didn't want to be a leader. So I'm just wondering if there's something about the culture of the internet. And since we're all equal, and they have this wonderful, the human megaphone, my name's Tom Friedman, my name's Tom Friedman. It's great. But at the end of the day, somebody's got to stand up and say, I'm in charge, And so I'm just watching that and wondering about leadership in the hyper-connected world. I think it's a very different kind of thing that we haven't sorted out yet. So thank you for your question.
Good morning, Mr. Friedman.
Morning.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
I'm in engineering here, and I'm an American citizen and I'm proud of my country.
Great.
But I have a couple of concerns that I'd
Please.
like your comments on. I think as Americans, we have been drinking the Kool-Aid of American exceptionalism.
Right.
My take on America and what made America great
Yes.
is not the exceptionalism of the American people,
Yes.
but the exceptionalism of the American ecosystem.
Interesting.
And
Very well said.
And what we're doing right now in budget cuts all over the place
Yes.
is we are starving the American ecosystem. The greatest, tallest redwoods, they're all going to die
Yes.
when the ecosystem basically dies off.
It's really good.
And what is your comment on this?
Yes. So I couldn't agree more. I didn't get a chance to get into this, but so we actually make the same argument in the book. We say, first of all, American exceptionalism, we make the point, exceptionalism is not an entitlement. It's not like an honorary degree you get, and you get to have it for life, no matter what you do. It's not like Social Security. Your exceptionalist check doesn't come every month, no matter what you do. It's actually like your baseball batting average. It's something you got to earn every season. And we've fallen into the former category. As a country, we sound more and more like the old college coach, 40 years old, who always wants to tell you about that touchdown he threw in high school, And enough, okay, with the touchdown already? So what we actually argue, and this is a big part of the book, is that we actually had a formula for success in this country. You called it an ecosystem. We call it a formula for success. And we say exactly what you say. It was actually the greatest public-private partnership in the history of the world. It was built on 5 pillars. When you call an ecosystem, we call this 5 pillars. Educate your people up to and beyond whatever the level of technology is, whether it's the cotton gin or the supercomputer. First, universal primary education, universal secondary, and then the best post-secondary in the world. That was the first thing. Second was have the world's best infrastructure, roads, airports, telecom, et cetera. Third, have the world's most open immigration policy to attract the most energetic and talented minds from around the world to come here and start 30% of the new companies in Silicon Valley every year. Fourth, have the world's best rules for capital formation and risk-taking. And lastly, have the world's most government-funded research to push out the boundaries of science and technology so the VCs like Reid and Jeff can come pick off the best flowers and turn them into new companies. That was our 5-part formula for success. And it goes back to Hamilton and then Lincoln. What did Lincoln do in the middle of the Civil War? He passed the Morrill Act. He created the land-grant universities. He created the University of Wisconsin, the University of Nebraska, the University of Texas. What did he do? He built the National Railroad, infrastructure, connecting the Pacific and the Atlantic. What did he do? He started the National Academy of Sciences. He did that in the middle of the Civil War. What did Eisenhower do? All our great presidents enriched it until now. So the argument of our book is we made the worst mistake a species or country can make. First, we misread our environment. We thought the end of the Cold War was a victory. It was a victory, but it was also the onset of the biggest challenge we'd ever faced. We just unleashed 2 billion people just like us. Just when we need to be tying up our shoes, we put our feet up. Then we compounded it in the next decade after 9/11 by spending a whole decade chasing the losers from globalization rather than the winners. We chased Al-Qaeda and the Taliban instead of China, India, and Brazil. So you put those 2 decades together and you get the central chapter in the book. It's called The Terrible Twos. The first decade of the 21st century, the worst decade in American history. Because what happened? Take all 5 points of our formula for success. Education, we're now in the middle of the pack by any global comparison. Infrastructure, I just flew from Hong Kong to LAX. It's like flying from the Jetsons to the Flintstones, okay, basically, all right? You compare the infrastructure. Immigration, I don't have to tell half the people in this room. We educate the best minds in the world, and then we tell them, get the hell out of here, okay? Rules for capital formation and risk-taking, how did you like that subprime crisis? Government-funded research, have you ever seen that graph? It looks like an EKG heading for a heart attack, okay? So if you look at all 5 pillars of our success, what you call ecosystem, you're exactly right. We've gotten away from all 5. This is what made us exceptional. And there's all these people out there saying, I did this all on my own. I was one lonely guy out there. You did nothing on your own. You did nothing on your own. Did you build that road, that police station, that rule of law, that infrastructure? You did nothing on your own. And one of the telling stories in the book is from Bob Inglis, a Republican congressman from South Carolina, one of 2 Republican congressmen who was defeated in a Republican primary by a Tea Party candidate. He's a good friend of mine. He's at a debate, he's at a town hall meeting in a small town in South Carolina. Man stands up in the audience and says, keep your government hands off my Medicare. He says, where do I start, you know? Keep your filthy government hands off my Medicare. I'm just one lonely guy. Maybe your Medicare is the central government program in your life, you know? But that's what's so disturbing about America right now is we're tossing our country around like it's a football. It's not a football. It's a Fabergé egg. We could actually drop it and break it. And so when people come along and just say, like the Tea Party, and I respect the Tea because they got organized. You know, they weren't just out there beating drums and saying, I'm in the Tea Party, I'm in the Tea Party. No, they actually got people elected, you know. But all they're about is cutting. It's like you said, you can grow without a plan to some degree, but if you cut without a plan, you could hit artery, you can hit bone very quickly. I can lose weight by cutting off both thumbs. It may be hard to get my next programming job. So to me, the Tea Party is just the tea kettle party. They're just about letting off steam. You know, because steam without an engine doesn't take you anywhere. What we actually need, and there is a Tea Party in this country, it's the huge radical center that today is completely orphaned and unrepresented. And that's why in the book we call for a third party. Thank you.
Morning. My name is Mike Alpern. I'm a design lead on the mobile team.
Great.
I had a question for you. If you could share some of either your observations or your personal experience about the nature of influence. Both how one develops it and how it grows. Some things I think have been true from time immemorial. Some things are different in a hyper-connected world. And so I'm curious what sort of your observations are about how one develops.
I've never really been asked that, so I don't really know. I got a little trouble this summer at the Aspen Ideas Festival because I was moderating a panel of 2 technologists the first day, and I did make the point that I have never been on Facebook, I have never been on Twitter, and I have never smoked a cigarette. And my plan is to die saying all 3. And people were shocked, and the reason is I'm in an enviable position. I have a platform, okay? And for me, what Facebook and Twitter do would overwhelm me. I mean, Jeff and Reid got me to sign up on LinkedIn, but most of the time I'm just hitting do not accept because I just can't deal, okay? I'd just be overwhelmed by everything that would come in. But I tell you that by way of background, that for me, it's all about substance. That is, if you get your substance right, everything else will follow. If you build a diamond hard reality about yourself, whatever you do, no amount of spin or criticism can hurt you. If you don't build that diamond hard reality, no amount of spin can save you. And so what I personally am so focused on, and that's why I just can't do all of these things, is coming here, talking to people face to face, connecting it with the people I talked to yesterday, writing columns and books. Because I think that's my protection. Whatever influence I will or will not have, and I'm not sitting around there, believe me, I do not wake up in the morning, look in the mirror and say, actually, that's the quickest way to lose your influence. I'm Thor, I'm up there on Mount Olympus. Because when you think you're Thor throwing down thunderbolts from Mount Olympus, you know what you do? You stop schlepping down to LinkedIn at 8 in the morning. What do I need to go there? I know what's going on, you know what I mean? And you stop doing that grunt basic work, And so every one of my columns is built from the ground up. So it's on a solid footing, And so whatever influence I have will flow from that. And I don't spend a second thinking about it. I'm focused on the next one from the ground up, and then the next book from the ground up. And one day someone will add it all up, and hopefully it'll add up. But if you start by saying, I want influence, you'll make some very bad choices. And you'll get, I think, misdirected. So,
thank you.
I'll try to go through these quicker.
Hello, Giovanni Iachello. I'm in the strategy group here at LinkedIn called Business Operations.
Amazing. Does anyone speak English without an accent here? Yes, amazing.
So yeah. I have a question, which is there a contrarian view to what you're saying?
Please.
And which is, labor arbitrage has been going on for a long time, but now we are seeing a reversal, a certain sense of rebalancing. If you look at labor costs in India are rising a lot,
yes,
China rising
and China
a lot.
Too.
And so we are seeing some industries even coming back, right?
Yeah.
So manufacturing coming back to the US, which is great news. And a lot of the pain that people are feeling here is really in that part of the economy, because if I look around, Silicon Valley, right? People like us,
sure,
the unemployment rate is really low.
Absolutely.
But is there a future in which there is a rebalancing of the economies across the world, in which manufacturing comes back to the U.S. and there will be more balance, and those problems will just go away?
I think there will be. I think that's where it's heading. Okay, and that I really do believe in laws of comparative advantage. I think we're in the big transition right now to that. It may take another 10 or 15 years, but you can already see it happening. I was in Hong Kong. There was a couple of things that really struck me. One is industries there moving to Vietnam. Cheaper, so they're losing. Second, I talked to the head of one of the biggest car companies in China. He said 5 years ago we had 3 robots in our plant. Today we have 60. So they're quickly adapting all of these technologies as well. And I think that the big mind shift, and also it was very interesting being in Hong Kong to see this, because Hong Kong was 100% blue collar, or 98% blue collar 30 years ago. Today it's 97% services. So how did they make that shift? A big way they made that shift, partly was financial services. It's still a huge financial service hub. But the big way they made that shift was that this year they had 37 million tourists, 23 million from China. And they just flock in. They drive every hotel, restaurant, tourist site, all these services, medical services and whatnot. And Hong Kong's doing so well, they just announced they're giving every citizen $775. We had too much money in the treasury. Now, excuse me, I got that wrong. Every resident, not citizen. Every legal resident of Hong Kong, which includes the New York Times bureau chief, who gets $775 because he's an official resident of Hong Kong. And so it's a very important point. That is middle class is so embedded in our mind with a blue collar working in River Rouge Ford plant. You know what I mean? Maybe middle class will be being in the hotel, restaurant, or gaming industry, you know. And do you know how many Chinese tourists we accepted last year? 810,000. So Hong Kong took 23 million. By the way, we could get 23 million. 23 million would love to come here, see the Grand Canyon, go to Disney World, Las Vegas. We don't let them in for security reasons. So until we overcome that, and by the way, the hotel, gaming, and restaurant industry, highly unionized. Still one of the most unionized industry, that service sector. So these are good union jobs. And all of that's about the OODA loop again. Now, what world am I living in? Maybe I shouldn't be chasing, do we really want the Foxconn jobs back to assemble iPods here? Are we really going to get them back no matter how much China revalues their currency? If a labor here makes $22 an hour and one makes $1 an hour, I mean, what revaluation is going to balance that up? And that's getting back to that, what is the global supply chain? Which parts of it should I try to maximize? You know? And I think it's just all about, again, thinking about what world that we're in. But I think net, it's going to flatten out in a really positive way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Ryan Wickstead from Sales Development.
Mm-hmm.
So, as we see Occupy Wall Street and a majority of Americans supporting the movement, as well as a big gap between the top 1%
Right.
and the remaining 99%.
Yeah.
So as we have a majority of the population with less and less to lose financially,
Yes.
how long do you think it'll be before the problem has been exacerbated to the point where it does end up like Tunisia, we do end up like
Right,
Egypt,
yeah.
where people are rioting in the streets?
Yeah, you hope that it will never get to that point. But it's worrying. It's worrying because we're making such bad choices, right now. Like if we just had a grand bargain between Republicans and Democrats, get a little stimulus here, long-term fiscal reform, and the two parties come together and just sort of hold hands and say, we've got to, like the stock market would go up 1,000 points tomorrow. Be a whole different sense of optimism around the country. But the political system is so broken right now that it cannot deliver optimal results. It can only deliver suboptimal. And the question we have in the book is how long can we be a great country when the political system we have will only deliver suboptimal? So if you look at us in China, I would argue we have a superior system, they have an inferior system, but right now they're getting 90% out of their inferior system, and we're getting 50% out of our superior system. So I hope it doesn't come to that, and one reason we argue in the book for a third party is we think the system needs a shock, and it needs shock therapy. And that would be based on a grand bargain that the two parties can't come to. And if you haven't been to americanselect.org, when you go back to your desk, Reid won't mind, click on americanselect.org. And there's going to be a third party in the next election. We don't know who their candidates are going to be. They're going to internet primary, an internet election, okay? But there is going to be a third party on your California ballot. And I think we're just at the beginning of a whole nother revolution there. It's going to be like Ross Perot or whatever. And I think people aren't going to take it. They're not going to sit back and wait for that to happen. The country's in a revolutionary mood. But the biggest, most revolutionary group is this silent majority that hasn't quite been organized yet. But if Michael Bloomberg announced tomorrow that he was running for president on a kind of grand bargain ticket, carbon tax and get out of Afghanistan, he'd have 40 to 50% of the vote tomorrow. I'm absolutely convinced.
Hi, my name is Hans. I help build products here. You mentioned a couple of things at the beginning that were pretty interesting. One, you said that the U.S. is a tentpole, and that the world would be very different if we weren't. So would it be such a bad thing if it really were more of a multipolar world? What would that look like? Second, you mentioned projecting power. So there's lots of ways to project power. What are the most effective ways, and do we really need to have bases in 120 plus different countries? Would it matter if we had bases in 20 countries?
Right.
You know?
I think that, to take your very good question, the latter is inevitable. We're going to have to make choices now. So the latter is inevitable. As for the former, I'd be very happy to have a multipolar world. We already do in many ways. It's really not so much us. It's on the basis of whose values. Is it on the basis of the values of Vladimir Putin, who throws in jail, basically any Russian oligarch who challenges him, and kicks out any global oil company and violates their contracts because he just decides he'd kind of like that oil well for himself? Is it based on him? Is it based on China, who doesn't let their Nobel Peace Prize winner even go to Oslo and basically threatens 18 countries into not attending Oslo either because one of their citizens won a Nobel Peace Prize for democracy? So it's really not who's in the group, but whose values define the group. And so I'm very happy to share power with the EU, because these are people I think share our values and will promote the kind of world we want. Putin, not really, frankly. If it's me or him, I'd rather it be us. I'd rather he be working for us rather than us be working for him. And ask Michael Khodorkovsky, sitting out in Siberia, what it's like to challenge him, what kind of rule of law you have there. So I think it really does matter. It doesn't mean we should have a monopoly. It means I think the right values should really dominate. And I think we represent more of those than less. I don't think we're so far from perfect we can't see perfect. But I'd rather have where we are setting the tone than other people. Thank you.
I'm Dhananjay Ragade. I'm a software engineer here at LinkedIn. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about values. I was wondering about how different countries view human rights. I was thinking about your first example with the sports complex in China,
right,
where they could just go in and raise a whole bunch of neighborhoods and say, we're building this complex here. People that live there, either you get paid below market or you just get tossed out.
Right.
You really can't do that in the US unless you're building a Walmart or something. So I was wondering if you could talk about that.
It's a very good point, and it's a real problem. It's a real challenge because, in fairness, there are two ways. One really enshrines the power of the individual and is looking after that person's interests and saying that comes first. And the other is enshrining the power of the collective and says, well, the best thing for us is actually to have a high-speed rail, and to have a high-speed rail means they have to have a straight line, and to have the straight line, we're going to have to move you, and you, et cetera. And that's just two different systems. I love our system. But I think what's missing in our system now is our inability to democratically come together collectively, to produce the kind of coherence, focus, and stick-to-itiveness voluntarily, democratically, collectively that China does culturally and autocratically. That's what's missing right now. Because all the problems we face, dealing with the globalization, the IT revolution, debt and deficit, energy and climate, they all require collective action. And what have we lost most in our country today? We've lost the ability to act collectively. That's really what our book is about. And if we can't act collectively, voluntarily, we're going to have a real problem, because sooner or later these problems will just build up. And then we actually won't be free at all. Because if Mother Nature and the market start imposing their will on us because we cannot impose our will on them, we'll be less free than had the Soviets won the Cold War. So I think that's really the challenge. Thank you very much. Last question, it better be good.
Hi, I'm Ariana. I'm in sales, and I actually wrote my undergraduate thesis on the impact of social media platforms and rapid dissemination of information through social media platforms like Twitter on revolution.
Interesting.
And I focused particularly on the Iranian protests from 2009.
Were you able to do original research in terms of going there, or how did you do it?
No, I did interviews locally in Berkeley, and I also analyzed Twitter data.
Wow.
And one of the common misconceptions about those protests was that Twitter was actually a media of movement that propelled social change, when in reality, because of government restrictions on the internet, Iranians were not actually the people that were generating most of the tweets. They were actually coming from outside of Iran.
Interesting.
So
what implications did that have? What did that, therefore what?
Therefore, essentially the impact that Twitter had on the revolution was that it placed the protests underneath an international spotlight. And in that sense, I guess it depends how you define movement.
Right.
But no real change happened in Iran.
Yes.
And I guess I kind of was curious to hear what your thoughts might be on how these themes might apply to a country like Iran, where all of these issues and themes almost seem more magnified, and even after all the hype about those protests, the country still seems to be in a state of extreme paralysis in terms of change.
I wrote a column at the time that said bang bang beats tweet tweet. at the end. And that I've never fallen for the hype that this was about the Facebook revolution or the Twitter revolution any more than the Khomeini revolution was about the tapes, underlying it's about people, their grievances, and their willingness to lose their fear. That's what started the Green Revolution. We're not afraid, we're going into the streets, we're going to take on the regime, we're ready to die. How they get into the streets, whether someone posted on their Facebook page, tweeted them, called them, faxed them, sent carrier pigeon, I think we can really exaggerate. I think some of these technologies amplify it, and there's no question about that. It's a good thing. I mean, I have no, but you always, to me, have to look at the underlying grievance and the underlying balance of power. And what made the revolution successful in Egypt was that the army one day just said goodbye to Mubarak, you're gone. A million protesters influenced the army. Some of those protesters got there because they were on Facebook. Most of them had no connection to Facebook. They got there because cell phones, so they just got there. And so I think these technologies are important. They amplify, but they're in no way decisive. People, God bless them, still have bodies and souls. And when you feed one and not the other, you get in trouble as a family or a country. And I think that's what we always have to keep our eye on. Yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. This was great. Really appreciate it. Thank you.